the absolute evil known as Abyss and Gengu, the warrior who would finish him. Abyss was disappointed when he thought that he had been the last hero, but John Wood emerged behind him and finished him off with a cut, although, because of the damage he received in the fight, he also would die. This would be the cliché story where the hero wins and, when he dies, he would become a legend. But that was not important to him. All the people had put their hopes in him, and he was tired of caring so much, so he would die along with Abyss, and he would get rid of his destiny. He could finally rest and be free of his responsibilities. He closed his eyes because he would never have to hold a sword again. He began to hear several voices, and when he opened his eyes, he saw two people in front of him. Listening to people talking and seeing each other, he concluded that he had been reborn. And not only that, but that he was the son of a master swordsman, the Count Ippolita. Then his father prepared to give him the blessing of the sword, because he was the youngest son from the best family in the empire. So it was normal to receive that blessing, to which everyone began to place their hopes in him, making him very nervous because he had already made a promise not to use a sword ever again. Then, because of the blessing ritual, the swords began to fly towards him, and people began to react with emotion because they thought that Riley, which was his new name, was showing too much interest in swords at a young age. Riley could only cry and curse himself for having been reborn and not being able to die. 19 years had passed, and now the Ippolita family was choosing a successor. That family was blessed by swords. The first master of the sword, Leon Finn, the swordsman, was the one who sought the purest essence of power. And Lloyd Finn, the second master of the fast sword, who, although he was not as strong as Lion, was not someone who could be beaten in terms of speed. Some people were discussing how there was also a third son, but from what they knew, he seemed to be useless because he was lazy by nature. A servant of Riley who was listening jumped to defend him, but what he didn't know was that while he was doing it, Riley was, in fact, slacking off. The lazy man remembers how, when he was that same age in his past life, he obtained a holy sword by accident to prevent the destruction of the world by the Demon King. And from that moment, he stopped living thinking about himself and only lived as a warrior. That was why in this life, he did not plan to wield a sword again. Then Ian appears, the servant who had defended him moments before, and they speak a little about the successor's choice. But Riley makes it clear that he did not plan to participate, and he did not care about the rumors about him being lazy, because they really were not a lie. Now we move to lunchtime, where Riley was talking to his mother about the same topic. Although she only cared for her son to be happy, Ian still insists that Riley was very intelligent. He was the son who learned to speak the fastest, and at only 2 years old, he could read high-level books. But the conversation stopped. Something was wrong. Riley's mother began to bleed and fell to the ground, leaving Riley in shock. Riley's mother had been poisoned, and, angry, Riley began to sharpen his senses until he managed to hear a faint voice whisper that he had accomplished his objective. Yes, the person who had been behind his assassination attempt was his father's first wife, Orly Finn Ippolita. Riley asks Ian to deal with his mother and for him to go get a doctor because Riley knew how to do emergency treatment. And one more thing he asks of him: their wooden sword. After applying treatment, they receive a consultation with the doctor, confirming that the poison only worsened their mother's illness, but was not toxic, so her life was not in danger at that moment. Riley and Ian discuss how someone could have done it on purpose, and they debate about the information they had gathered so far, although they still had to investigate to discover the person behind it. In the end, Riley tells Ian that he would use the sword because he had to meet someone, and he leaves the place. He only wanted one thing in his life: to live happily next to someone important to him. But someone had tried to take that wish away from him. He meets Orly, who greets him provocatively using his title of lazy person. They have a very pointed conversation. Riley tells her that he perceived the same aroma as his mother's soup from her. She explains that it was because she was returning after checking on dinner and makes it clear that Riley was acting strange and that it was better for him not to try anything stupid. Later that night, Orly is talking with someone. She mentions that Riley had started training after that, But he didn't even know how to hold a sword, mocking him. The other figure she was talking to was an intruder who should not get caught by Riley. But he had his doubts, since he knew that Riley was weak, but when he was observing him, he could not help but feel that he was being seen by Riley, as if he were being waited for by him. And by Orly's orders, he leaves. While sneaking through the corridors of the nocturnal mansion, he meets Riley, who tells him that he had been waiting for him since they were in the training field. Riley launches a rampant action without giving the intruder any chance, and manages to make his dagger fly. Then leaves a small glimpse of the devil inside him and finishes the matter. Shortly after, Ian goes to Riley and tells him that they found a body in the mansion, which seemed to be a murderer. But Riley seemed very calm. After several things, he gives Ian a note with a prescription for medicine to cure his mother. So Ian goes to prepare things, while Riley had to do something else first and gives a glimpse of the dagger hidden in his room. Riley's father was arguing with his first two children about how they had found nothing, and the spy had underestimated them by entering unarmed. Meanwhile, Orly was writhing with anger, but was more concerned about the location of the dagger the spy was carrying. The next day, Riley was talking to Ian about how his mother's condition had improved and asks him to give him a fruit from the trees. This made Ian look up and notice an object in the branches. He takes it down with a stone and realizes that it was a dagger, but more importantly, it had the same symbol as the empty murderer's sheath. At night, in a carriage, a figure inside and another outside were having a chat, talking about what happened in the mansion and how they had not found the body. So they planned to go themselves to take care. This way, their daughter wouldn't be in trouble anymore. Back to the mansion, Orly was too tense because of what had happened and couldn't take it anymore. But then someone knocked on the door. It was his son, who had come to check on his mother and tell her that Grandpa's industry had arrived in the city because they had seen them in the town. Orly changed her expression and relaxed, because now that her father was there, Riley and his mother could survive. While resting on a tree with his heightened senses, Riley was listening to the intruders talking about their plan that night. He interfered with their communications, telling them that he didn't care what they planned to do. He only warned them not to bother him or enter the mansion. Outside of that, they could do whatever they wanted. The spies were too confused by the unknown voice, but they decided to end the matter anyway. So they began to infiltrate and arrived at Riley's mother's room. Then, they heard Riley's voice again. So they turned around, but there was nothing. They were looking in the wrong direction because, behind them, Riley had appeared, ready to finish them off. When they realized it was Riley, the intruders were confident. One of them quickly stood behind him to finish him off, but before he could do so, he was pierced in the chest by Riley, who was using a weapon tied with some ropes. He finished him off. The other spy thought Riley's information was wrong, but he still attacked him. One hand had fallen, so he planned to run away, but clearly, Riley was not going to let him because he had warned them, and this was his own fault. In that way, another one fell. In a different place in the mansion, Ian and another maid were fighting against the intruders. Although they were never a challenge for Ian, his plan was to look for Riley to see if she was okay. But while he was doing so, a figure got in his way. Upon noticing the strong presence, Ian decided to take things seriously and attacked the figure. He did not seem to be a match for Ian, but after launching an attack that was dodged, Ian left an opening. The figure planned to take advantage of it, but before he could, he was pierced by a dagger near his heart. Seeing the figure's confusion, Ian finished him off and returned to search for Riley. A little behind, Riley saw everything that happened, although he was confused because he had tried to pierce the figure in the heart. Still, he assumed it was normal because his body was different from his past life, and he finished it anyway. So, it was time to go back to being an innocent young man who didn't know anything. Ian was looking for Riley and finally found him up a tree. He informed him of everything that had happened and told him that his mother was safe, which relaxed Riley quite a bit. While they were heading to his mother, Riley told Ian that he found something strange and gave it to Ian to analyze. When Ian looked at it in more detail, he realized that it was the recipe and list of instructions for the poison that Riley's mother had ingested. They also found the culprit elsewhere in an office that was destroyed. Riley's father was there, fighting the figure who had survived. The figure had already achieved his goal of recovering the dagger and now only needed time to escape. Even so, Riley's father launched an attack without fear, and they had a great fight. The figure only focused on dodging and blocking, making the skilled swordmaster quite angry. Then, Ian entered, agitated, claiming to have found the person who had poisoned Iris, Riley's mother. With Orly at his side, the masked man was in shock, and Ian gave the note to the Count, who, while reading it, began to release an enormous amount of fury, because the letter was from his wife, Orly. Meanwhile, Riley was in his mother's room. Despite her condition, she did not stop worrying about him, giving us a nice moment between mother and son. But then Ian arrived and painfully confessed who was responsible for poisoning Iris. She refused to believe it and became deeply upset because it hurt her a lot to hear. Riley asked about his father, and Ian told him that he was talking to Orly, but there was a surprise guest. The figure decided to stop hiding his face, revealing that it was his father-in-law all this time. Orly told him that when he took a second wife, she was very hurt. But the Count was not going to let them go because he knew that she didn't want him. They had been satisfied when they were given the name of his family, but they had also decided to bring a group of murderers to his house. He ordered them to leave. Orly and her father left in pain. But at least their children were safe because they had not been involved, and as long as they maintained their industry, they would not fall. They could start over, but there was someone who was not willing to allow that. He did not understand what Riley was doing in that place, but Riley told them that he came to continue his revenge. This angered Orly, who tried to hit him, but Riley said that his father would not stay still if he saw him beaten. To this, Orly's father told him that he was very stupid because no one had said anything about letting him return to the mansion, and he planned to take him as a hostage. Riley told him that he could let him go through with it because he had not done anything to her. But it was not the same with Orly, who had tried to kill his mother and sent several assassins. He managed to dodge a dagger that was coming at high speed, surprising everyone. The spies launched themselves to finish him off. While fighting with everything, Riley remembered the old days when he did the same thing in his previous life, but now it was time to act in self-defense and finish everyone off, which he managed to do with a simple swing of his sword. He did not plan to live the same way in this life. Orly's father was filled with terror because Riley had done all of that with just one swing, and on top of that, it was just a wooden sword. Riley was going to give him a merciful death. The poor man said it was good that Riley finished him off, but he asked for his daughter's forgiveness. Riley refused without hesitation and finished his task. After that, he decided to return. Moving to the mansion, we see Ian with the other maid, quite worried because they had not been able to find Riley and feared that he had been taken hostage. Just before something bad could happen, Riley's father appeared, having heard everything. Then, Riley appeared, filling the servants and his father with relief. His father asked him to follow him to his office. There, his father mentioned that he knew Riley had discovered the paper with the poison instructions, to which Lloyd, his second brother, reproached him. While their mother had been expelled, Riley had been playing hide-and-seek, and surely he had fabricated that piece of evidence. But their father intervened, stating that the truth had already been proven anyway. In reality, he wanted to know how Riley had found that paper. Riley explained that the day he tried to go to training, he found the murderer running toward him and managed to defend himself as best as he could. Once the murderer escaped, Riley returned to find that the intruder had already been killed, and in his belongings, he found the paper. After listening to everything, the Count decided to end the talk, but not before telling Riley that he wanted to talk to him again. The next morning, Riley met his older brother outside. Although they did not speak, Riley left the place. Afterwards, the two brothers discussed what had happened to their mother. Lloyd was naive and did not believe what had happened, but Leo, the most reasonable, recognized their mother's crimes. However, It was not yet the time to give up because the successor had not yet been decided. He could still resolve their mother's matter once Leon won the race to become the successor and took charge of the Ippolita name. Everything would return to normal, revealing Leo's hidden intentions. When Riley arrived with his father went straight to the point and asked him to leave, shocking Riley. Then, he gave him a letter, which was a call to a famous competition between swordsmen. Riley tried to refuse and evaded his father's answers for a while. However, with few options, he eventually asked his father not to force him to wield a sword. His father told him that he knew Riley could do it. Although these words had an adverse effect on Riley, he began to remember all the expectations others had of him in his past life, along with the enormous pressure that entailed. This made him anxious. When he discovered that Ian had been listening to everything behind the door, he took the opportunity to run. Riley ended up hiding in a closet, lamenting the memories of his past life and questioning why he had been born into a family of swordsmen. Although not only that, even the servants themselves. Some great sword masters, and then he heard voices outside. It was Sarah. One of the servants and her mother were talking about Riley's disappearance and the subject of the competition, as well as about how Iris, although not having an heir, bothered her a little. But she was fine with that. The problem was that Riley sometimes made a sad expression. He just said that everything was fine and pretended to have a happy expression. So even though everyone gave up on him, she would continue to support him because the only thing she wanted was for her son to be happy. After the talk, he leaves, and Iris takes the opportunity to go to the closet and talk to Riley. Having been discovered, Riley comes out of hiding and talks to her mother. The reason why he used to hide was because he was afraid to hold a sword, to which his mother offers him to go for a walk because, as she was his mother, she would help him. Later, they were getting things ready. Ian and Sarah would go as the bodyguards. After Riley's father has a farewell quality with Iris, everyone departed. They would leave Solia, which was the name of the castle where they lived, and was named that way because of the proximity of Iris's father to the castle. We see that there were several areas of Solia because it was a city of one kingdom at a time, because of how huge it was. They also had something that Riley had mentioned on one occasion, something called cola, a drink that tasted like heaven. To which Riley becomes euphoric, asking for more details because he loved that soft drink but had not been able to try it in his current life. At that, the car begins to shake. They were receiving an attack. It was a group of goblins. Riley begins to get very anxious, but he had to trust that Sarah could finish them off quickly. Although Sarah was being very slow at that pace, she couldn't take her soda soon, so he doesn't care anymore and he himself would take care of it. Riley threw himself onto the battlefield. He was angry because he could finally have cola, but it was already too late that day due to the slowness of Sarah, and while he was explaining her mistakes, he was taking care of every goblin. By the time he was done, everyone was at a loss for words to explain what they had just seen. That night, Iris was talking to Ian about how she had some knowledge about Riley's true abilities, but more importantly, she was happy that he hadn't been hurt and asks Ian to keep it a secret. She didn't want anyone in the castle to know about it, including his own father, which he accepted without remedy. The next day, they had finally arrived in Solia, so they planned the next destination, which was to go try the soda. So Celia begins to direct them through the city. In that, we see a person in the distance who is observing them, and he mentions that they would be subjective, then gives the order to another girl who looked in bad condition. Then, with Riley, he reached Nirvana after trying his long-awaited soft drink. Although nearby, we see some guys messing with a woman, activating the protective instinct of Sarah, who was planning to go help, but Riley stops her and tells her not to do anything because everything was about a performance. She didn't understand what Riley was referring to, but he tells her that they were always focusing on her sword. Normally, if the girl had been in trouble, she would have moved her head in all directions. But in reality, she was only focused on Sarah's sword, so it was better not to get involved in those matters. At night, Riley was with Ian at the inn, who was somewhat depressed, and begins to tell that when he was in the castle, he was buying tickets for the tournament. When he announced that he came from the Paletta's family, he had to buy 4 tickets for spectators and not as participants, which frustrated him a lot. But not only that, but he also met an old friend of his, and they chatted a little about the Paletta's family. In the end, Ian was ashamed for Riley's title. All that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't had to keep the secret. After that, they arrive with Sarah and his mother, although Riley was too tired from all his talk with Ian. So they planned the next place to visit before the tournament, which would be the right side of Solia, because the lower side was not a very safe place. So with that said, they leave and arrive at the Temple of Solia, a place that demonstrated its power by serving the goddess Irenice and to heal the wounded, using divine power in her treatments. His mother, who was sick, owed a lot to that temple. Riley felt that the temples were not that different from those in her previous life, and seeing that her mother was busy, he decided to take a look around. Ian goes with him, and while they were talking, Riley remembered how in his past life he met a saint, who, as soon as she saw him, told him that he had been chosen by the Holy Sword, starting a very hard life from that day on. And he meets a saint who welcomes them. Riley was a little rude and mentioned that if she wanted him to greet her, she had to reveal her face first, to which the saint, thinking it was funny, decided to accept and reveal her face. It was Saint Phrygia. Riley was not a big fan of the saints. In fact, it could be said that he hated them, because of one of them, that he was chosen as the bearer of the Holy Sword, and received the mission to kill the Demon King, because only he could do it. So Riley decided to go away from there, making the saint pout and stop him for a moment, and then whisper something in his ear, to which Riley reacts nervously, and sparks an argument between these two, in which Riley manages to make Azricia feel bad. And by the time she recovers a little, Riley decides to leave because nothing good would happen if he continued in that place. All the other people try to cheer up the saint, and when she completely calms down, she receives a strong shock, and turns to look at Riley in disbelief at what she had felt. Ian asks Riley what it was that the saint whispered in his ear, and we see that she had actually asked her if he had other interests. But he decided to leave the issue aside. He knew that he had acted badly, but nothing good came from getting involved with a saint. After returning to his mother and Sarah, it was time to go to the next destination, the tower, the place which focused on magic. Riley was very interested in it because he had not seen it frequently all his previous life. He only had access to blessings and curses that he never wanted to have. Living like this exerted constant pressure, and he did not want to experience something like that again. So he expected magic to be different. In magic, one chose his own path and wondered if he could overcome his trauma. Sarah comments that there was a device to measure magic and asks Riley if he wanted to try to use it. Everyone encouraged him to try, although the most excited was Ian because he, as the mercenary who used mana the most during the Great World War, was the first to notice Riley's talent. And now, everyone would finally know. Inside the tower, they begin to take a look at what was interesting about the place. Although a guy arrives with them, asking them what they were doing there, because it was not a place for everyone, and he asks them for identification. After confirming who they were, he lets them explore the first floor, although he warns them not to touch anything, stopping Riley right away because he was about to touch an important object. Seeing the situation, they decide to ask him to guide them, to which the person agrees to give them a tour and presents himself as Oferta. Thus, a tour of the entire first floor begins, and we see a glimpse of a large series of devices. But after a while, it was time for Riley to restart the mana measurement. In the face of Ian's strong presence, he decided to accept without remedy. The mode of use was simple. He just had to put his hand on the orb and it would begin to fill according to the amount of mana measured. But first of all, Ian asked what would happen if his mana was too high and the measuring orb broke, to which Oferta said that such a thing could not happen because even the geniuses had only come close to filling it, but never broke it. Only the Archmage Strobe of that tower could do something like that. Finished that topic, Riley decided to place his hand on the orb and thus begin the measurement. By the time he finished the measurement, nothing special had happened, and the results seemed to indicate that Riley was someone average, breaking Ian completely, causing him to start fighting with the orb. Riley takes the opportunity to discuss what they would do next, and they decide to go to eat. Later that night, when Ian was cleaning, he notices that there were many wizards gathered. Seeing something, they all looked very nervous. When Oferta comes to see, he realizes that the measuring stone reserved for magicians was broken. Nobody had any idea who was responsible, but if the Archmage found out, there would be problems. While discussing who the culprit could be, because it couldn't have been an ordinary man, the stone behind them ends up breaking, leaving them even more surprised and plunging the tower into chaos. His mother asks Riley if something had happened, to which he says no, and asks his mother if she was okay with having a normal son. She, with a smile, tells him that he was lucky to be able to be someone normal, to which Riley happily plans the next place to go with his mother. At night, in another place, we see the two bandits from before who were looking for their next target to attack during the festival, until they find a certain group of people who had been the same from the day before, who had turned a blind eye to the girl. They thought they were the perfect prey. And although one of them had a good feeling, they decided to get to work. And that way, they managed to move through the crowd. Ian was going to be the first to be affected. But he was not going to leave them without a fight. After showing superiority, he would make sure to make them regret attacking the family Paletta, making the bandit realize his serious mistake. Sarah, on the other hand, was also taking care of the garbage. She knew they were from the low class of Solia because of their strong aroma of dirt, so she would forgive him for a place where they belonged. But no, without first making him pay for trying to touch those she served. She placed her foot on the subject's arm, and after giving him a threat, she made him pay. By the time everything was resolved, Riley was with his mother, and together they watched the fireworks. When Celia had already returned, she mentioned that the real tournament would finally begin. It was finally the day. Everyone was gathered because the fencing tournament would begin. That day, there were 3 duels scheduled, although there were not as many people gathered inside the place as opposed to outside. Well, it was very difficult to access for the commoners, but thanks to a certain device in the sky, it allowed everyone to enjoy the combat, and even outside, it was like watching a broadcast. Although at the wrong time, because this was managed by the tower, which could cut scenes if necessary. Then they prepared because the tournament would begin, both sons of families of nobles skilled with the sword, although not at the level of Paletta. And with the referee's signal, the confrontation begins. Riley was somewhat entertained, although he felt that in the end, it was just a child's game. So Ian tells him that he should have participated, and he replied that it would be very annoying because he loved his nickname of being useless. Ian didn't understand why. Despite having such abilities, he decided to hide them and show such a tired face. Riley's mother attacks him, mentioning that if that was the case, then Riley should find a girlfriend and get married, giving him a hard time. So he decided to go to the bathroom to relax. While he returned to Ian, a nobleman intercepts him. He was annoyed by how Riley had referred to the contest as a child's game, to which Riley apologizes forcefully to try to leave. But no. The nobleman could not believe his words, to which he introduces himself as Aflock, son of Aranjim family, and would be in charge of punishing him, and demands to know his family's name. After analyzing his options, he decides to flee from there, and the nobles go after him. Ian tried to block their path, but by using mana, he is dodged, and thus they managed to arrive with Riley. But the situation turned around, and Riley took Aflock by the wrist, repeating that he was sorry. The force he exerted was enough, but he could never compete against Aflock's mana, or that was what he believed, because Riley, even without using mana, did not loosen his grip even a little. Before they could come to help him, Riley took Aflock and forcefully threw him against his assistant. Already on the ground, Riley got nearby and told him that he could smell drugs on him. If he didn't want to be discovered, it was better that he left him alone. Leaving everything with a threat, Riley returned Ian to reality and asked him to take care of the rest and to pose as the person responsible for the events if anyone asked. After that, he returned to his mother and Sarah, because the second fight would begin soon. One of the participants would be the favorite candidate to win the tournament. Many even said that he could surpass the Paleta family. Even so, Riley did not believe it was a big deal. After the referee gave the instructions, both participants prepared themselves, and from what could be seen, the winner had already been decided. The referee gave the order for the fight to begin, and against all odds, the winner was Aprion, the second son of the Aranjam family. Yes, it was Afloc's younger brother, the annoying person from moments ago. Although, of course, Riley was aware that he had not won by his own ability, and he was wondering why Ian had not yet returned. He could not see any direction of mana, so he wanted to know what was happening. Going back to Ian, he was helping the nobles, and he began to remember how Riley had fought before, starting to have delusions with the idea that Riley could be a dragon. But that couldn't be, he was at his birth. That meant then that Iris was... He decided to put those silly thoughts aside. The only thing that mattered was that Riley was an incredible person. Then some people behind him spoke to him. It was Saint Frisia and her group. She had heard that Riley was in that place and wanted to see him. The tournament was over for that day. Sarah and Iris were talking a little about it and how surprised Sarah was when Riley showed his skills with the goblins. That's when she realized that Riley was not there, because apparently he left the place to go look for Ian without them realizing it, and they decided to go look for him. But they found a crowd, and they realized that he was there along with the priests and paladins of the Temple of Solea. He offered to mention that he was looking for someone from the Paleta family. Meanwhile, Riley was on the outskirts of the place, and he had gotten a mask. But suddenly, he noticed a flow of mana which seemed to come from the slums of Solea. It was far from there, but he had already warned them before, and now he was not going to let them go. Somewhere else at night, we see the subjects from before who had come out alive by pure divine grace. Although Beta, one of them, was still angry about the humiliations suffered before against Sarah. That was why he was going to take revenge and planned to use that garbage from the wizard tower, ignoring his friend's attempts to stop him. He arrived with the other girl and forced her to wake up, and then told her that he needed to ask her for a favor, because without her it would be impossible to achieve it. To which the girl, seeing that they trusted her, accepted. We see a car inside, which the brothers Aranjam were arguing, because Afloc looked too nervous, and we see that outside of this car Riley was watching. But in the end, everything seemed to be in order, so he was going to return. But then he received a strong current of mana, and realized that there was someone in front of him blocking the way. They were Nai, the girl from before, and Beta, the bandit. They didn't know why Riley was riding in that car, but even though he had a mask, Nai knew that he was the one they were looking for. She knew that most of the people they saw when they arrived at Sunny Bebe had said that he trusted her. It was he who gave her a chance and believed in her, so it was something that only she could do, and she had to be up to the challenge. Preparing to fight, we returned to the Saint and everyone else who could not find Riley and had no idea where he could be. But before they could do more, a nervous priest arrived and mentioned that something was happening in the central square. Riley was observing what was happening because this was the first time he saw magic. Nai was determined to kill Riley and had a high level of magic for being so young. Some guards appeared, but were killed after dodging several Riley attacks. Riley thought how great the magic was and how little physical effort it required. Nai loads an ice spear and launches it, but Riley, using her sword, cuts it as if nothing was happening, to which Beta seems furious, scolding her. Then Riley realizes that it was the same guy from last time, so he was determined to finish him off. Now we move with Ferda, who had been sent to find the person responsible for breaking the stone, and the only person he could think of was Riley. But there was no way such a lazy man could have done it. His mana was quite normal. Not even the Archmage could have done something like this. It was impossible for that person responsible. Then he encounters the chaos of the city and notices many people running in his direction, so he decides to go to the place of the conflict and arrives just in time to see how the masked man was able to deflect the magic, using nothing more than a simple swing of the sword, leaving him in shock. Riley kept deflecting Nai's attacks. Even though she gave all of her mana, it was of no use. And although so much waste of power was taking its toll on her, she wanted to respond to the wishes of Beta. So instead of launching individual attacks, she would use consecutive shots. But nothing. Riley was able to deflect each and every one of the missiles as if nothing. Beta angrily scolds Nai, but this guarantees him that she would win, even if it cost her her life. Riley felt that the color of Nai's magic was strange because he had already seen it in his previous life. The dark purple color was magic of a very powerful level, but that magic was unstable and strange. It didn't even seem like Nai could control it at all. Even so, she planned to go all out, so Riley had to stop her. Then several people began to appear, cheering for Riley to win. But again, they made him remember negative experiences from his past life, reliving those moments of pressure in which he had to submit to the wishes and expectations of others, all because he was a warrior, and as such, that was his duty. Nai realized Riley's state and asked Beta to flee because at that moment, Riley could kill everyone and she would hold him back with her life. But Beta got angry and said no, he could die before finishing his job. If he died, it would only be worthless garbage for him. He had invested a lot of money in her, even after making a monster abandoned by the tower. Then they noticed Riley, who was already tired of hearing all that. Nai tried to attack him, but it was useless. So Riley decided to knock her out to free himself from that problem. Then he would take care of Beta, but before doing so, he was blocked by a magic shield and realized that there was a person in the sky. Riley had been careless for a moment, and he could also feel an energy coming from Celia's left side. It was different from that of the guards. It seemed that there was someone in the temple. The wizard, seeing that he couldn't make Riley talk, decided to force the information out of him. Judging her at the same time, that person was the Archmage Astrova. Moments ago, we see Ferda with the Archmage informing him of the chaos that was happening in the public square. Astrova, to whom he was injecting things into a slave and preparing other things, tells him that he was not planning to go investigate insignificant things. But when Ferda mentions that there was a certain test subject from the tower involved, Astrova changes his mind, but first warns him that there was already someone fighting against that thing. And that thing. That someone was Riley. Astrova decides to test Riley's skill level, so he launched a powerful technique, to which Riley prepares and ends up managing to return the attack, to which Astrova counterattacks with water magic. But because of the chaos caused, he had lost Riley from sight, and a sword flew, breaking his shield and piercing him. After that, Riley had disappeared. Although not before having completed his mission to finish off Beta, we found ourselves again with the group of saints, arguing and confused by finding traces of Astrova's magic. But in the happy ending, Frisia decided that they should leave there. They had to do something more important to find a certain person, by order of the goddess Irenice. Returning with Iris and the servants, they saw that they were talking about what happened, and then Riley appeared behind them, leaving Ian confused by his disappearance. But his mother colluded with him, so they did not give more importance to the matter. So, now that everything was resolved, they decided to return. Although it was not yet over for Riley, because his old hero habits were still alive, since he would have to see that girl again. We see how the brothers Arangam were being interrogated by a guard. Although in the end, since they had no relationship with the accident caused, they let them go, and left from there. Back with Nai, she was very confused and began to be overwhelmed with the memories of the people who experimented on her. But then, someone appeared in front of her. It was Riley, who began to try to interrogate her without much success. So, since she didn't understand anything, she planned to end all that once and for all. Nai would end up that way in the end, and she began to have bad memories with her mother in an afternoon that it was snowing. Her mother had all her faith in her because she would participate in the tower experiments to earn money and get out of poverty. And if things went well, Maybe she could become a magician, or so she thought before seeing the horrors that they did there. Astrova offered a special medicine. She could refuse it if she wanted, but if she did, there would be no money. So, with terror, she accepted, and the only thing she could think about afterward was that she wanted them to finish her off. Sometime later, it had been a success. Mana had settled down correctly and had at least 6 magic circles, so the experiment had been finished, and Nai was able to return to the streets. She would no longer have to take that medicine again, and she could return home to her mother. Or so she thought. But when she arrived, her mother could not recognize her and rejected her. Crying, she confessed to Riley that she didn't know what she should do. She could never meet the expectations of others. Riley told her that that wasn't the case. They were both wrong from the beginning and offered to help her. Nai was confused, so Riley asked her if she wasn't tired of living that life and if she didn't prefer to throw all that away and start over, which Nai ended up accepting. So, Riley would tell her everything else later. For now, he could only tell her the reason why he helped her was that she reminded him a little of his past self. Moving back to the tower, we see Astrova angry with Ferda and another person because they had not been able to find the one who broke the stone, and he let his fury unleash on his apprentices. Astrova asked them why they had not checked the debris of the stone because they had a seal, but apparently it had been removed. They also mentioned that the brothers Eranjum had not been able to deliver a certain shipment after all the scandal that had occurred. After that, Astrova was planning to go again to a certain place, but Ferda asked him to stop. They already had more than enough 7 circles. But before he could continue, Astrova had disappeared. Returning with Riley, he was investigating some shipments, and inside these there were certain illicit substances. But before being able to investigate further, someone appeared behind them. Yes, Astrova, who was happy to see Nai because he would no longer have to go looking for her. He also wanted to know how they had removed the seal. Instead of answering, Riley had a little fun incriminating him with the substances exposed there. So Astrova, angry, charged a powerful attack. However, Riley was able to deflect it. Even so, Astrova was not going to stop, but Riley beat him. With a dropped arm, he had everything against him. Even so, Riley rarely gives him the opportunity to flee, if he so desired. He wanted to, because there had to be a stair that went to the basement, and he had just found it. Yes, that was the place where they did all the biological experiments. Astroa scolds Nine for betraying him, even after having taught her how to use magic. But no, the one who had taught it had been Ferda. Besides, she had now a chance to start from scratch, and she didn't plan on letting it be taken away from her by taking Riley's side. So Astroa is forced to leave the place, leaving them alone. Nine asks why he doesn't finish off Astroa, so Rayleigh explains that it was because of the big picture that he wanted to live a quiet life without standing out. So in those moments, he took a step back. Even if he were a demon king or the world was about to end, he would only light the flame until shortly before the explosion exploded. And then he just stopped to observe. That way, nobody would notice him, and that was what he was doing at that moment, revealing the horrible acts of Astroa. He enters the laboratory, and Nine, after gathering up the courage, enters with him. There, they do an inspection on the substances, and Nine says that she could identify Rayleigh with her eye. No magic. She just had to think about the impression she had of the other person, and she could know their location, something like a radar watching the cries of the test subjects. Riley frees them because, with that, the flame would be lit. All he had to do now was watch, and he tells Nine that she was now free, but he makes sure to leave a plaque with an emblem of the family of certain brothers at the scene. The next day, it was time for the next combat, so Rayleigh watched along with the others. Although Sarah and Ian were talking about the brother Eranguium, who had won his fight the day before, there was something strange about him. He did emanate a different aura than the last time, and that's when the fight begins. A sword flew away, and the fight was over. We returned to the Eranguium family, and Aflaq was very stressed because his sister had lost, and his shipment of substances had not been delivered because the lower part of Solia had betrayed them, and they would no longer give them any more merchandise. So, Aflaq remembers what happened with Riley and how he had threatened him. So, going crazy from the withdrawal symptoms, he came to the conclusion that he just had to go get it back. So he left without caring about anything else. Back with the family, the tournament was over. So, they would make a little tourism and they would return home the next day. While Riley thought how his plan was going, because we see that moments before he gave the order to Nine to go to the temple 20 minutes after starting the tournament, because the bomb was going to explode. Telling everything. What happened? Naheen was insecure because even her own mother had chosen not to believe her, so those in the temple would not either. But that was not true. Now she was no longer alone. All the other prisoners were the same as her. Now she had someone she could call her companion. Everyone was nervous in front of the temple, but Naines calms down, and the gunmen of courage, so they enter. Already in there, they try to throw them out, thinking that they were people from the lower parts of Solia, but Nain explains that it was not the case, and they were there to reveal the cruel experiments carried out in the tower. Everyone was surprised, and someone asked her name. It was the holy Frisian, who after listening to Naini, began to prepare to move the people from the temple. We see Aflok again, who was wandering the streets and scaring passers-by. But at that moment, he meets with Astrova, to which he complains for not having sold those medicines to him. But Astrova tells him to shut up, and tells him that he had already realized, and takes out a sample of the medicine, and reproaches him for having caused a mask and betray him despite wanting that medicine so much, because apparently Flock had forgotten his badge that incriminated him. So pretending that he didn't understand anything wouldn't help, because apparently Astrova thought that Aflok was the masked man all this time and burns the medicine in front of him, making him fall to the ground to cry. So Astro wonders if he had been this weak all this time. But before he can continue thinking, a group of saints appears with Frisia among them, and she begins to read to him a list of all his charges and asks him if he was related to all those crimes. Astroa planned to teleport, but his magic is cancelled thanks to Nain's powers. So, seeing that, he tries to deny his crimes, to which, in that case, he offered to do an oath before the goddess Irenice. But it was impossible. Frisia was using the eye of truth. He could not lie to her, so he decided to admit it. He was the culprit of manufacturing those medicines and selling them to the nobles, all to finance his little experiment, to which Nine angrily begins to demand that he, as a child, had nothing and had caused a lot of damage. It should be noted that at this point both Rayleigh and his mother and their respective servants were watching the entire scene on one side of them. Frisia planned to take Astrova to Solia's castle to judge him, but he told them that he was an archmage of the 7th circle. It was not a good idea to mess with him, which Frisia says that was true. But he had received a revelation that a person who would save everything had appeared in that world, so the confrontation begins. Although Astrova manages to kill all the paladins without much trouble, so Frisia uses healing magic on them and asks them to evacuate all the people from the place because she planned to stop Astrova right away. So, this one prepares a great attack to which the saint responds by creating a barrier. They had managed to save themselves. So, Astrova decided to continue attacking. But this time, she launched several missiles instead of just one. This time, the barrier did not last long, and even Nine, using her cancellation magic, could not do much because Frisia too was seeing the damage. So Ian, who was nearby, enters the combat and, with great skills, destroys all the projectiles. It was time to act. So, Riley asks Sarah to take her mother to a safe place. Astrova, having seen that very talented people were beginning to appear, planned to kill them all at once and prepared a powerful hell magic. Nain was aware that she could not cancel that attack. In order to have a peaceful life, she had to beat him. But was she able to do it? Riley, anticipating in her thoughts, asks him if he was planning to let everything end that way. Rayleigh begins to prepare to take action, while Nine wonders where Riley had spoken to her from. Frisia was terrified by the large amount of Astroa's magic because the attack that was coming would finish them without a doubt, so Nine asks them to flee. She would try to stop him. She had to do it. She had endured everything for that day because, although she had gone through many losses, Riley had once again shown hope. So, even if she died, it was fine. a certain masked man enters the scene and tells her that he had gone through a lot to save her. He wouldn't let it all end like this, deflecting the magic in a single blow, while saying that Riley tells them to leave because he was planning to finish Astro off because he wasn't that strong. Really. And he takes the saint as if she were a cat with his paladins and places them to the side where they won't get in the way. His original plan was not to intervene, but his mother was about to be hurt, so Astro was going to learn a lesson. 9 was very confused. But Riley tells her that it was better to finish him off at once and think about it later, and begins to give orders. He gives a bow to Ian and instructions while placing 9 in a certain position because he planned to finish everything in one single move, and turned, seeing Astroa, challenging him to try to finish him off if he could. Astroa decided to launch a wall of fire on them, but seeing that Riley was taking care of it, he conjured a poisonous mist. Although this was neutralized by a barrier because Fresha had joined in to help. Astroa was furious, and he only had half of his mana left, so he would go with everything to finish them off, and begins to set up a powerful snowstorm. Rayleigh asks Nain to start charging her attack and aiming his heart to finish it off with a single shot. That was the only thing he had to worry about, because Ian would be in charge of deflecting all the attacks. In addition, they also had the Saint, and they began. It was almost time for Nain to have her attack ready, but Astro decided to attack them below the barrier. So Rayleigh made sure to put them at bay. Saved. And by the way, she decides to stop hiding his identity, surprising Frisia because Riley had appeared out of nowhere for her. Nain was ready. She had been able to get to that point thanks to everyone. So even if she couldn't win against Astroa, she wouldn't regret anything. Riley gives the order, and Nain releases the shot. Although, of course, he was not going to stay as if nothing had happened and launches a counterattack. No one did not have enough strength to beat him, and apparently he would have regrets. But at that, Rayleigh throws his sword, and before Astrova could react, he is crossed by it, causing him to lower his guard and receive the full impact of Nain's attack. And so, after everything that happened, snow began to fall throughout the city. Frisia runs out to assist Nain. It could not end that way. She had to open her eyes. By night, we see the Saint with Nain, and she remembers the talk she had with Ian moments ago, in which they were talking about how Riley had just disappeared from the scene without anyone noticing, as well as that apparently they came from the family Paletta. Back to the present, Nain was waking up, and Frisia tells him that they were in the temple, as well as that her condition was worse than expected because she accumulated a lot of magic. During the experiments, her body had mutated and her life had been withered, and there was no solution for this. This fact hurt her a lot, because Nain had the courage to reveal herself to Astroa to stop him. But more importantly, Nain asks her how much time she had left to live. Frisia had not been able to cure her, only extend her time. Everything would depend on how quickly her condition progressed, but it would surely last only until the fall of that year. For Nain, it was longer than she had expected in the first place, so she thanks Frisia. She also tells her that all the credit had not been hers but someone else's. They had to give her thanks to that person. To which Frisia asks if she knew who was responsible for everything. To which Nain tells him that yes, she knew who he was. At night, in the castle, we see again the fencing tournament, which Rayleigh was watching along with the others. When this was over, a person appeared, Prince Daniel, warning that he wanted to make an announcement before the award ceremony for the winner, and began to mention what happened in the tower, as well as that a nobleman had become a great role model, and he knew that he was present at that moment. He was a member of the Paletta family, and everyone was in shock. And the prince asked where he was sitting, that hero, and Rayleigh had disappeared again. He had gone to hide in one of the bathrooms, wondering how he had been discovered because he was very careful not to reveal anything that would give him away. Then, we see two people outside the bathroom who were arguing, but in the end they opened the door. They were Frisia and Nain, who were looking for Riley. He wanted to know how they had found him. Nain told him that it was thanks to her eye that worked as a radar. After crying and complaining a little, Rayleigh asks them what business they had with him. to which Frisia tells him that he had been chosen by the goddess Erinyes. Yes, Rayleigh would be again forced to play the role of hero because, according to the revelation of the goddess, he had been chosen because of a dragon. Because soon a dragon would appear that would not only threaten to destroy Solia, but also the entire world, and according to the goddess, it would be Riley who would finish him off this time. He asks why it had to be him, because he would defend his title as a lazy at all costs, and was planning to leave the place, but Frisia stopped him by mentioning Nestroa's name. He knew it was Rayleigh who had finished him off, and he was angry thinking about how she found it. And he sees Nain, angry, approaches her and tells her that this was a secret. Maybe she should consider that she had betrayed him. Frisia intervenes and explains that she was the only one who knew all the facts. The prince did not really know everything that had happened with Riley. Here is the text with punctuation added. In the end, he again rejects the saint's request and leaves, but not before asking Nain if she wasn't planning to go with him. The next day, we see Rayleigh's father in the mansion, reading a newspaper, which had an extensive article talking about everything that happened in the last few days in Soria, as well as the fact that the person in charge of solving it was the son of the Count and Paleta, for which he was awarded a Medal of Honor. Such events forged a proud smile on Rayleigh's father, and he prepared to send a letter back with everything. They were preparing to leave, although the civilians saw them, surprised and intrigued. Iris asks Rayleigh about Nain, to which he tells them that he brought her from the tower. Because when he was investigating the surroundings the day before, he discovered that she was very good at magic, and since they went to the tower, she was interested in magic, so he wanted a servant who didn't use swords for a change. Ian tries to protest, but Iris intervenes. She had no problem because it would be the first time that Riley chose something of his own free will, so there was nothing more to discuss. So, Nain properly introduces herself to everyone. In that, we see that the night before, when they were with Frisia, Riley wanted to take Nain so he could keep a close eye on her and avoid being put in more problems. Although if he didn't want to, he could finish everything at that moment. But Nain decided to go. He still had unfinished business with Riley because she felt that if he stayed with him, she could find a way to start a new life. Back, they were ready to leave because the Count told them he had sent a letter, and now they were in a hurry to return. Although before we see a talk between Nain and Rayleigh, in which she thanks him because she always thought that she would never be able to get out of there. After a while, the group meets the holy priest, Laversa. He tells Iris that he was there looking for certain people because they had forgotten some things, and he gave them to Nain, some objects that were her reward, or rather the belongings of the deceased Astroa. Nain did not want to keep any of that, but Laversa tells them that it was better that they had it than that Solia's castle had it, and that he swore by the Erinyes goddess, and that there was nothing strange involved. However, Frisia, who saw from behind, was not so sure of such words. Naina assured that the objects didn't have any sign of magic, so they decided to accept it, and they said goodbye because the Count had put pressure on them to return home quickly. Frisia's face showed a lot of hostility against Laversa, and we moved to the sanctuary at night, where these two were having a conversation. She was surprised that it was Rayleigh who was destined to be the hero who would save them all. But if that was the revelation, they just had to wait. Frisia, already alone, did not know the priest's intentions. But the reality is that she had received 3 revelations. The first test was to be careful of the one who hid his intentions. Then a dragon would appear, but a young man would confront him. Frisia knew that the first revelation referred to the priest and that perhaps Rael could stop his entire conspiracy. That's why she told that revelation to him. Already at home, the Count welcomes them and asks Riley to show him the medal, to which he agrees without a second thought, leaving his father pleasantly surprised. After the Count calmed down a little and saw the servants, he also noticed Nain. Then Iris suggests going inside to tell him all the details, but before they could do so, he appeared before Rayleigh, his brother Lloyd, and with an arrogant air, demands to see his medal. To Rayleigh's silence, he suggests that the story of the medal was fake, so Riley, annoyed, decided to agree and show it to him. Lloyd couldn't believe it and thought that maybe it was fake because there was no way Riley could get something like that. So Riley offered to give him the medal because he seemed to be very fond of it. Besides that, it was annoying for him to have something he didn't need. Such words had done a lot of damage to Lloyd, but he was still considering accepting the medal. However, it was taken away by Rayleigh. He was going to have a fight with his brother, but he was stopped by their father. After that, Iris and Lloyd have a brief conversation about their trip, and Iris gives Riley an opportunity to leave from there to whatever the shot is without hesitation. The conversation between these two still continued, and then Lloyd took advantage to throw a hint at how Riley seemed not to care in the slightest about the position of successor of the family, among other negative comments while saying goodbye. But it was too late. He had awakened Nain's fury, so using magic, she created a mound of earth that made Lloyd stumble and be briefly embarrassed. Later, Lloyd was being scolded by Leon for falling in that ridiculous way. But leaving that topic, they talk about how Riley hadn't changed anything besides the fact that he had brought a very strange woman from his trip. They knew he had something very strange but had no idea what Riley could be planning, because this was not a womanizer, and there would have to be a reason behind having brought that woman. So they agree to keep an eye on him as much as possible, and they say goodbye to a medal that represented the gratitude of Solea. How someone like Riley, who had only gone to watch a tournament, was able to obtain was something that escaped today's imagination, but the only thing he knew was that it could interfere with his plans to be the successor. We see Naini now with her uniform because she was being instructed by Sarah on how to serve her master properly, and all of that was being done in Riley's room, with this one present. At the end, Riley and Ian were having a talk about what to do with Astroa's belongings. So he decides to postpone that decision until consulting the subject with an acquaintance. On the other hand, Naine was still in her training, and by the time they finished with Rayleigh's room and said goodbye to him, and shortly after leaving there, they met Lloyd. Sarah bows, and Nain was forced to do the same because Lloyd had a terrible temper, and it was best not to get him angry to avoid problems. Lloyd was seriously interested in her and asked her name, to which she reluctantly answered. Lloyd wanted to continue talking to her because it was the first time that Riley brought someone, and he also took the opportunity to ask her how he managed to obtain that medal. But when faced with his questions, she could only receive a cold silence from Naini. She measured the level of Lloyd's mana to realize that he was just a weakling and that he had nothing special to be called a teacher. But today, on the other hand, he was getting upset for being ignored and tried to threaten Naini with expelling her from the house. But she was not going to let him and tells him to stop bothering her because her only teacher was Riley. Not being able to take it anymore, she planned to attack Lloyd, but with her magic, she put him to sleep before he could cause any problems. Sarah was nervous, but Nain told her that if she took him to bed, there would be no problem, because he would think that everything was just a dream. Then Riley comes out, and although he was surprised to see Lloyd on the ground, he does not give much importance and asks Nain if she was already free. And as she is, he takes her with him because it was time to learn magic. Riley had been analyzing Astroa's artifacts for some time, but was not able to find a way to use them. And when he asked Nain, he received the same answer because he had never seen Astroa using them. So Riley leaves the topic and would rather ask an acquaintance. Upon hearing this, a girl asks him why he doesn't learn magic from that guy. What was the reason for needing her? Riley relaxed and tells her if maybe she didn't want to leave that place and if she wasn't tired of being abandoned. People put a lot of pressure on her, but no one really cared about her. They only went to her because she was useful to them. Each one should do what they wanted, and she reminded him of himself in the past. So she didn't have to think so much about it. But above all, he chose her because an idiot had told him that he couldn't learn magic even if he died, and ended up saying a lot more nonsense, losing all respect that Nain had acquired for him while he was riding in the carriage to a specific place. Naina begins to explain that to use magic, you first needed to have a circle or a ring. Each ring surrounding the heart is equivalent to a magic circle, and in the case of Nain, she had 6 of these. The origin of all that was light, and the first thing any magician had to learn was the miracle of creating something from nothing. That was the basis of magic. First, he had to learn to know what its compatible attributes were. Nain's case didn't seem to have a specific one, but rather she was compatible with all the elements, taking advantage of the opportunity to show off a little. Riley had several doubts and wanted to check on some personnel and mentioned again that acquaintance of his who they were about to meet. In the end, they arrived, but Nain had doubts about how incredible that friend was, but she planned to see for herself. She was determined, although such confidence did not last long. When entering the place, Rayleigh began to call his friend Endel, and he appeared complaining because that day the store had closed. But Riley didn't care. They had a brief talk, and he mentioned Nain, who was very surprised and didn't understand why that person was there. Rayleigh tells her that his old lady used to hear something very interesting. They had told her that she had to get rid of him because in fact, he was the dragon of the prophecy. Well, he had to be since there were no more dragons there besides him. Endel starts laughing, and both he and Riley wondered why they would have asked him that currently. Dale was the only dragon in Solea, because he was at least 3,000 years old without having seen any other companion while they were drinking some drinks served by Endel. Riley asks him if he had no intention of attacking Solea, but he tells him that no. The idea of doing that was a mere annoyance. So Rayleigh brings the main topic to the table by taking out Astroa's artifacts, and after a discussion, he gets Endel to analyze them. But not only that, but he was analyzing the 3 at the same time and finished in a matter of seconds. The first object was the cape. By wearing it, it would make the magic you used not be affected by the weather seasons. The bracelet was a warehouse because by injecting some mana into it, you could summon a box that worked as an inventory. To give the ring to Nain, that was the last object, and he asks her to put it on. When doing so, she begins to absorb some mana, and the ring collected the entire sea around the user. Riley had his doubts, but in fact, it was true, which only left him more confused. Because when he used it, he had not noticed such an effect. But according to Endel, that was only because Rael was a monster who was not aware of what an idiot he was. In the end, they agreed that Nain would take care of the objects because Rayleigh was too lazy to carry them, and they changed to the next topic. Riley wanted him to measure the mana of Nain, so he accepts, and by doing so, he realizes that there was something special. There were many things mixed together, and surely that was the reason why her element was gray, because it did not matter if they were fireballs, ice, or some other element. All her magic was purple. Dark and Dale, he did not rule out the possibility that it was for that reason. But he wondered if Riley had already realized Nain's situation, and that apparently, he did not have much time left. Then Rayleigh wanted to measure his own mana. And again, Rayleigh confesses that the reason why she wanted to learn how to use magic was because she was too lazy to pick the apples from the trees on her own. They had moved out of place where there was a mana measuring rock. Although after a lot of time passed, nothing happened to that. Nain suggests that perhaps time was his attribute. It had to be related to time, and that's when the rock breaks. Riley didn't quite understand what that meant, but Alba explained that it would be impossible for him to use magic that wasn't related to time. To give an example, he creates a fireball that a normal wizard could create, but when Riley tried to do it, he would see an attack like that. Riley's dream of being a wizard had been shattered, and Nain explains that he saw in the tower that the vast majority of time magic had died. But she consoles him by telling him that at least she could make the fruits ripen faster and make them fall without having to go pick them up. After that, at home, Riley practiced a little magic while they served dinner. Although he could only create a brief light for half a second, then his brothers appeared and asked where he had been the entire day. He tells them that he was in the Gipa village, to which his brothers are surprised that he had gone without an escort. But it was not completely true because Nain had gone with him. Before they could ask more, Iris arrives and says that they had received a visitor while Rayleigh was outside, and he lets him in. He was the Laversa priest who presents his greetings and bows to Nain, leaving people surprised to the brothers. So, they decide to ask him why he so much respects the servant. The priest asks if Rayleigh had not told them, and they look at Nain's receiving her permission to tell them. Then, with a smile, he explains the merits of Nain in Astroba's fight, and her position as a magician of the Sixth Circle. Leaving the brothers quite surprised, Rayleigh, for his part, did not care that Labursa had revealed that information. Rather, he just thought that he had to be up to something shady, because it would be a cliché that such an openly good person turned out to be evil, and that he was never right. Labursa was about to leave the mansion that day, but not before leaving a package for Rayleigh. Rayleigh says goodbye and parts. Nain, by looking at him, noticed that there was something suspicious because, in theory, he had gone to check on Rayleigh's mother's health. But the vast majority of the time he spent with them, instead of with Iris. Rather, he had gone alone to leave them that gift, which could be considered a bribe to ask for a favor in return in the future. Having said that, Rayleigh thought that there was no longer going to be any problem, or so he thought, until he was summoned by his father, and he questioned him about Nain because he had found out that she was a magician of the Sixth Circle, a level only below Astroba. He asks her why she wanted to be a servant, because with her contributions, she could receive better treatment. Nain tells him that in that place she felt she had found something that the Wizard Tower lost. To which the Count, understanding the situation, asks her what she thought about Rayleigh, to which Nain, with a quality smile, tells him that she thought he was a good person. Between the two, they created a very uncomfortable moment for Rayleigh. After a brief talk, they finish the topic, and Rayleigh mentions that it would soon be summer, and that year he also wanted Rails Field. Meanwhile, Rayleigh's brothers chatted about how ridiculous it was that Naini was a magician of the Sixth Circle, and that it was surely related to the medal that Rayleigh received, and that, thanks to that, Ray had moved up several places in the succession. While some documents, a wanted notice is found. It spoke of a black magician who had been sighted in Brainfield. Lloyd suggests capturing the magician to accumulate merits, but Lyon proposes something different. Rayleigh always went to that place in the summer, and if he didn't make it back, it wouldn't look suspicious. So we see that Rayleigh had been granted permission to go to that place, and Ian, nervous as usual, asks Rayleigh how much time he would spend outside, to which he tells him that approximately 3 weeks. Even so, there was no point. Worry because Nain had conjured communication magic with Iris's hand mirror. To which Iris thanks her, and before they leave, Iris takes the opportunity to give Nain a gift as compensation, because she would be taking care of Rayleigh during the holidays. To which it must be accepted with joy and clarified that they leave very upset and with good reason, because Rayleigh had appeared before him to ask him to teleport them. So, in retaliation, he throws a fireball at him, which was easily dodged. So Rayleigh agrees to pay him for his help. Endel was going to help them, but he asks for something in exchange. He wanted Nain, although Rayleigh refuses because she had something similar to him, and he didn't want to give it to anyone else. Rayleigh arranged that Endel explains that he would send him to a nearby forest, because if he appeared directly in Rainfield, they would be arrested. In seconds, Rayleigh accepts the agreement. But before doing anything else, he mentions the topic of hope for Nain's life. But he stops halfway because he didn't know how to say it. Although apparently, Rayleigh already knew it, and Endel asks what he was planning to do about that topic. While Nain was waiting and stared at Iris's gift and decided to open it only to discover that it was a mask, and moved by the detail, she let out a few brief tears. Although at that point she began to cough a little bit of blood, remembering that she didn't have much time left, but she was still happy, so she didn't care about anything else. Rayleigh speaks to Nain because Zenda was already going to teleport them, and once they were ready, they were sent to another place. Rayleigh was furious with Endal because they had been teleported to a place in front of a powerful orc. The orc, taking a tree as a weapon, launches an attack towards Rayleigh. Although he, with elegant movements, places himself on top of the trunk, so the orc, full of anger, began to launch a large series of consecutive attacks. Although they were all dodged with ease, and Rayleigh, propelling himself towards the sky, took the opportunity to chain a powerful attack, falling thus finishing off the orc. Although he ended up splashed, so Naina offers to help him clean himself and casts purification magic on him. Although this only made him dirtier. While he argued why that had happened, the orc, using his eye as energy, gets up again. Although it is Nain who, this time, asks for permission to finish him off, so using her magic, she wraps it with it, and that way, she ends up again finishing that Riley cleans himself up. But there was someone watching him from far back. With the boys, they were discussing where they were, and no one mentioned to him that using detection magic, he had found a nearby place with many people, so they decide to go there. But when they left, they couldn't notice that a certain creature had emerged once again like a lifeless zombie. Back with the boys, it turns out that the place with many people was actually an ambush. Riley asks them why they did that, to which the captain of the other group tells them that they had seen all of Nine's black magic, and that she must be a dark fight because one had been causing terror in Rainfield recently, and they were sure that it must be Nain, alluding to the moment when he tainted Riley trying to use purification magic. To which the latter only wondered how he knew he had misunderstood so much. The situation, Riley, after intimidating them all, asks them for explanations, to which they tell him that Nine had used black magic, and that was characteristic of dark magicians. But according to Nine, this fact had no relation, and the color of her magic was due to what she suffered in the tower. To which Riley asks them for another reason to justify their reasoning, but there was none. While Rayleigh, for his part, could bet the name of his family on Nain, and seeing that they had messed with a nobleman, they realized their mistake in their way. The punishment for defaming a nobleman was life imprisonment. So Rayleigh gets tired and says that if they were really black magicians as they were accusing them, the best thing would be to kill them all and leave no witnesses. But Nain stops him and asks him to listen. First, everyone realizes the state of the girl's face. She asks them to listen to her story. After listening to her story, the captain was sorry for everything that Naini had to go through and apologizes for what happened. Because now, the misunderstanding had been resolved, and they were free of problems. Rayleigh decided to ask them what that whole dark magician thing was, to which they explained that a magician with a bad reputation had recently appeared nearby, and their old capital had fallen into the hands of that wizard. In fact, they had a wanted poster, and they gave it to Riley, to which he looked at what a wizard had the ability to move the bodies of enemies like zombies. The captain's father had also fallen before his hands, but then they heard a loud noise, and the orc had reappeared, to which Rayleigh had to take care of him again in a different place. We see a hooded man upset by the death of the orc. Despite having saved him not long ago, it seemed he hadn't found anyone useful recently. Back with the boys, Cap mentions that she was surprised that she served her Riley because moments before, when she was crying, Riley mentioned how much he reminded her of Ian. Anyway, he handed her a paper with their address because they would be there for a month. And they could go see her whenever they wanted, so she would invite them something as an apology. That already solved, they said goodbye because they had arrived at their destination, Rainfield. It was time to start the vacation. The boys were discussing what to go first, so Rayleigh suggests that they go eat a dish that was the specialty for those rainy days. Already in the restaurant, Nain seemed displeased by the appearance of the food. However, at Riley's insistence, she decided to give it a chance just to get a pleasant surprise, and Rayleigh proceeded to do the same and enjoy the food. Rayleigh and Naini planned to do a toast. However, Nain realizes that it was alcohol and reproaches them a little, but Rayleigh tells her to drink. There would be no problem if it was just a sip, and Nain, with doubts, follows his orders, only to discover that this had a very good flavor. Getting carried away with the emotion, she drank the entire glass at once. And Rayleigh was a little surprised. After that, he heard the guy at the next counter eating in a very scandalous way, and how they had already finished, they decided to leave there as soon as possible, because there was nothing to see. When the mysterious guy finished eating, they came to collect the bill, which he took dependent on his face. With a serious expression, he told him that he planned to pay another way, ending his life. Outside, the boys talked about the pleasant flavor of the drink and that they should keep that a secret from their mother. Rayleigh also mentions that in that place, it was better to use a raincoat to cover from the rain instead of an umbrella. Although now with Naimi, she would have to buy two, although the latter whispers how bad it is to share an umbrella, and when she realizes what she said, she questions whether she was drunk. Luckily, Riley didn't hear her, and she struggles to recompose her posture because, in any case, it wouldn't last until fall. Liberta was talking to another monk about Riley's location, and upon learning that they were in Rainfield, he began to worry and hoped he had not met that person because there was still time for the parts to be reunited, and finishing off that person first could be dangerous for their plans. So he decides to go look for Riley. However, Frisia appears before him and tells him that it was not a good idea to interact with Riley. Diversa asks her if that did not come from a revelation. Then, there was nothing to worry about. Riley would practically decide the fate of the world in the end. Frisia gets upset but decides to leave the place, reaffirming her words and wondering what the hell Diversa. Rayleigh and Nain were in a library, so they each agree to look for a book on their own and meet in the center. Nene had no idea what to choose, but while she was searching, she was able to find some books. Then someone spoke to her. It was about Nara, the captain from before, who was looking for some stories about the Dark Wizard. She took a look at the books that Naini was carrying, discovering that they were for curing hangovers and preparing food, giving us a moment of an embarrassed Nain, although they are interrupted by a loud scream and then another. So they decide to go look for Rayleigh. Together on the road, they questioned what those screams could be. When they arrived at the place where they had agreed to see Rayleigh, they found themselves in a series of lifeless bodies. Nain realizes that there were traces of magic in them, and although she had many doubts, she was only sure that the attacker had to have a high level of skill. However, she asks Nara to make a mental image. Riley did not understand why, but she ends up doing it. Nain began to use her tracking magic to finally find Riley's location. Nain was planning to go with him, but Nara stops her and she tells her that she knew that magical trail, the color black in the bodies and corpses that were rising. The magician who she was already searching had to be in that place. The black magician Raymond, the enemy of Nara's father, and the one who turned his people into zombies. Nain tells her that it was dangerous and they had to go look for Riley, but she tells her that that mercenary hero would evacuate everyone first, so they send Nain with Riley. While she was looking for other affected people, Naini arrives with Riley and informed him of the situation quickly, to which he checks on the enemies quickly. He gets a little nervous because that wasn't a zombie movie, and he killed some of them. Back with Nara, she was over. Now she just had to find the Dark Wizard, and remembers that, in the past, her father faced him. She asked her father to flee because they had already wiped out his entire family. However, his father told her that someone had to stop him, and that she would be the only one who would flee. Remembering that moment, she is filled with determination, but then she listens to the complaints of one person. He was the magician complaining to his subjects for not having been able to find a book about the Rainfield clouds. Although one of the zombies gave him a book, that was what he had been looking for, and with that he could mix acid in the constant rain. Nara, who had been listening, approached him to try to hunt him down, but he disappeared before she could reach him. Already out of place, Rayleigh tells Nain that they had gone to that vacation spot. They were not there to kill any magician. They were just evading the problem like a normal person would do. Then he begins to remember that in his past life, on many occasions, although he tried to help people, he is alone. They reproached him. If it had not been for him, they would not have gotten into trouble, and they would have been better off without him. Then Nara appears behind him, and she begins to explain to him what happened with the Dark Wizard. He planned to mix acid in the rain to turn hundreds of people into zombies. She knew very well how strong Riley was because she saw him fight the orc and asks him to help her. When the rain starts, the magician would turn everyone into his puppets, and he was the one who had finished off his father. Rayleigh tells him that it was a shame, but he was on vacation and he was going to get into other matters, leaving the place. And so everyone did their things. Riley was thinking that no one was going to take them away from him. Those vacations had been long awaited by him, and he didn't want to get into any more problems. The only thing he wanted was to be able to enjoy himself. However, when Nani asked if he was enjoying it, Riley didn't offer an answer. Nara was investigating. Throughout the day, and so the night fell, she had finally found the Dark Wizard. Apparently, he had not yet finished preparing the acid rain, and he planned to kill him as soon as possible, because she was going to take revenge for all her people. When the wizard looked into Nara's eyes, he remembered that they had the same shine as his father's eyes, because he could never forget them, and he was happy to find a survivor of that day. The magician provokes Nara a little, and although he could only summon one servant at that moment, it had to be enough. Then the zombie began to emerge from the earth, leaving Nara paralyzed because it was her father. A beautiful meeting between father and daughter had taken place. Nara, full of hatred, launched herself against the magician, ready to finish him off. And then we see some fireworks fall just right. At the same time, that nothing was close to connecting his attack. In another place, Nini and Rayleigh were watching the fireworks, and he asked Nini if she was having fun, but she, with a smile, said no, to which Rayleigh sarcastically told her that he already saw it coming. So he decides to put an end to the annoyance so they can continue enjoying. Nara was fighting fiercely, managing to kill some servants, and she was preparing to launch a direct attack towards the magician. But then a puppet stood in her way, receiving the attack. It was her father. Nara stayed frozen. So one of his companions brings her back to reality, to which the magician loads a powerful barrage of arrows and launches it against her. And the other companions were also being held. The magician mocks Nara for attacking her father, so she is enraged and launches herself again with strength at the magician. And the magician manages to accept her attack, or so she thought. Well, in reality, the magician had changed places with her father, and this one took the opportunity to charge and launch a powerful attack, hitting Nara and leaving her out of combat. The magician begins to laugh and says that his preparations had been finished in just 3 seconds. His plan would begin, and the countdown begins. 3, 2, 1 would finally begin. However, against all expectations, the rain began to freeze as if time itself had stopped, and one hooded swordsman made his appearance on the battlefield. The people in the city saw the stopped rain, contemplating the beautiful sky bathed in the light of the fireworks. But not only that, the rain was beginning a journey of ascent as if they were seeking to return to the clouds from which they were born, leaving people captivated by such a singular sight. The magician questioned Riley's identity. Although he told him to go to hell, he rather asked if he was not angry for having been interrupted, to which the magician realized that Riley was to blame for the failure of her plan and exploded in anger. However, Riley did not plan to stop and gave the order to Nain. The rain began to turn the color of Nain's magic, to which nothing realized that it was her who was behind such an unnatural event. The wizard, bathed in anger, decides to attack Riley by launching an attack that trapped his legs. But remaining calm, he freed himself as if it were a simple cheap trick. A horde of puppets launched themselves at him, but he cut them off like they had been made of paper. The even angrier wizard summoned an order of servants who planned to take down Riley. Orcs, goblins, wizards. Rayleigh was taking care of all of them like it was nothing, as if the wizard was showing a lot of cheap tricks. Then Riley would teach a real one, and it stopped. Or rather, no one could move. So Rayleigh approached the magician and made a cut in his story, closing that chapter. The puppets were disappearing, and Nara had the opportunity to say goodbye to her father. In another place, we see Naina, who had been using purification magic on the acid rain. Although it seems like she would run out of mana and the damage would be concentrated, her goal of clearing the dark fog had been achieved. She was able to purify the rain and protect the health of all the inhabitants of the city, allowing them to enjoy that moment, but above all, she had been able to protect him. The next day, Riley was reading a newspaper with the news in which the official story seemed to say that the magician had not been caught and that someone else had taken the credit. Nain wanted Rayleigh's merits to be more recognized, starting to look a little like Ian. But she explains that she felt proud saving people and wanted Rayleigh to feel the same way. Riley asks Nain to come closer for a moment, and she was afraid that she had made a mistake and was going to be scolded. However, Riley puts a hand on her shoulder and, with a smile, congratulates her on her work. He had never told her before, but he hoped that she would continue trying like that. After that, they plan to return home, but Nain's face becomes tense, and she tells Riley that they had forgotten something. He couldn't think of anything, to which Nain tells him that they didn't communicate to their house since they arrived at that place. At that moment, she realized and was filled with terror. So they decide to communicate as quickly as possible, and to do so, they use Nain's mirror. The person who responded on the other side was Iris, but her expression revealed that she was not very happy. Finally, an opponent had appeared that not even Riley could defeat. The boys tried to explain the situation to Iris, ending in an argument between the two of them. But since they had learned their lesson and would return soon, Iris decides to let it go. Although it seems like she asks to talk to Nain, to which she gives her a strong scolding for forgetting her responsibilities, and after that asks her how the fireworks were, to which Naina tells her that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. We move to a cliff with the priest Liberta, a place where the remains of the dark wizard lay, and he could only say that he had warned him not to be reckless, because they had to be careful to fulfill their wish. In a restaurant, we see Nara, who had met Riley and Nain, was there to talk to Riley. She tells him that despite her appearance, she was not a human, and during the last big war, she was in debt with Ian. She was the last survivor of the Basilisk clan, and she was there because she wanted to go with him to Solia, because her father's last wish was to see there one more time, and she wanted to meet him before burying the ashes of her father. It was something that begged him to allow her to do. That way, Nara managed to join them on their return trip, although Nain was feeling bad due to the use of so much magic. When Riley asks her about her condition, she diverts the topic to Nara, the story of her basilisk race. Nara explains to them that she could understand and perceive the energy of people similar to how a magic stone did, and they classified people by their color: red, white, blue, and some people were purple, like the dark wizard they had faced. But when she was going to tell more details, they are interrupted by another carriage. It was a guy who knew Nara, and apparently he was on his way to Rainfield to see a friend. Nara asks him if it was a priest as disgusting as him, but he prefers to see inside the carriage, only to exchange glances with Riley. Although in the end, Nara ends up scaring him. After that, Nara complains about the purple people, and Riley asks him if those people were common to find. But Nara says that not only had she seen 4 until that moment, one person in an unknown village, a priest who she knew in Rainfield, Cabal, the person from moments ago, and the dark wizard from previous days were the only ones she knew. But there could be more hidden around. Cabal and Liberta were in front of the remains of Gariel, the dark wizard. Although it was difficult to know how long they would take to restore it, the left arm had become useless. Cabal was angry because the other 2 subjects were missing, but Liberta explained that the head was dealing with something important, and they did not know what the right arm was doing. For now, they would have to wait and go step by step to restore the left arm. Back at the mansion, the boys had arrived, and Ian was the first to greet them, running to hug Riley and start crying. But Riley calms him down and tells him that they had a visitor, to which Nara introduces herself. Although they would quickly recognize her as a mercenary, he asks her if she was from the Basilisk clan, to which she says yes. Sometime later, Nara told Ian everything that happened, to which he tells her that her father was a great mercenary. She could be proud because she must have suffered a lot by herself, allowing her to cry. Ian tells Riley that the Count was outside because he had received a message from Solia Castle that seemed to have received an attack. Both his brothers and his mother were at home, but then Riley heard a loud noise, and when he went to investigate, he found a broken plate and Nain in poor condition. So he runs to help her, but she fell unconscious while he was knocked out. Riley and Endal were discussing why Riley, being aware of his situation, did not force her to take a break. He says that Nain was a fool who superimposed her work on her health. He also wanted to save the world by acting without worrying about the consequences on his body, but in the end, so much sacrifice was made, but his body was transformed into dust. Riley reminds Endel of when Nain had asked him some time ago, and then asked him for help to heal her. After that, Nain had woken up and watched Riley through the window. But then, something strange began to happen, and in an instant, no one began to see images of another world that they had never seen before. A city and people that she did not know, as well as Riley's past life. Just at the moment he broke, Nain runs out with Riley but receives strong pain, and Ian stops her, forcing her to take a break. Then Ian goes with Riley and tells her that she had had a nightmare, but at that point, Nain begins to cough up blood and falls unconscious. Sometime later, in the room where she was, appeared Riley's brothers because apparently they had been looking for her. But then he began to cough, to which Lloyd tried to help, but Leon stopped him, telling him to leave her like this. Lloyd insisted that if it were her father, he would do something about it, but then Leon hits him, saying that she had no salvation, and it was better to let her die. Although at that moment, Endel enters the room and checks on Nain's condition, to which Leon begins to ask who he was, although he was ignored repeatedly. So he pointed his sword at him and ended up saying his name, but not before acting a little threatening and proclaiming himself as a professor. But before they could ask him more, Riley appears, which he takes the opportunity to correct his profession, and tells them that he was a Rainfield doctor. Leon was not satisfied because he had acted with a lot of arrogance before, and in the face of Endel's provocations, he tries to resort to the sword once again, but stops there because of the enormous pressure made by Endel. He completely paralyzed him, being unable to move. But then, Nain wakes up screaming. And after Riley calmed her down a little and explained that she had been asleep for noon, she decided to get up to go to work. The others only saw her leave without saying anything. It seemed that Nain was unable to be in that place anymore. In the afternoon, in the mansion, everyone was full of sadness because Nain would leave that place along with Endel. Before Nain left, she said goodbye to Sarah in a hug that lasted more than an hour. Later, Ian joined in. It's not until Riley interrupts them when they remember what they had to do. Sarah gives him his favorite scarf as a souvenir, to which Nain takes it very gratefully, while Ian gives him his sword, letting her know that she was now part of the Paletta family and that he was fighting. Iris also had a gift for her, but as Nain had her hands full, she places the ribbon for her. Nain was flooded with feelings, but now it was Riley's turn, who gives her an apple because some time ago, when Nain told him that she would spend the rest of her life with him, Riley told her that he could cure her and pointed out an apple on a tree. She could live, and he hoped that she could continue cutting those apples for him. After that, Nain would become Endel's disciple. And saying goodbye for the last time, they left. In another place, we see a group of leaders discussing the war that was being carried out, and that the participation of the mercenaries on the enemy side was causing them a lot of problems because the rumors about their powers turned out to be true. If it had not been for the Count Piletta, they would have lost. They had to take things seriously. After that, the main leader asks about the Count's condition. But they tell him it was not good because he had lost his right arm. So, full of fury, he asks to issue an order of search against Cabal. We move with the Count, who did not look very well, and the nurses were talking about how he had not yet chosen a successor. In the mansion, Lloyd walked through the corridors without being able to get his brother's actions against Naini out of his head. Without knowing why he had changed so much, because before he thought that his mother and brothers had always done the right thing. But he decides to stop thinking about that, and looks out the window at Riley with confused thought. Then he is warned that the Count had arrived, but there was bad news. The three brothers run worried to receive their father, but Nara, who was also there, realizes that among the people present, there was someone with purple aura, and that person was the diverse priest who was with the Count. The three sons, with emotions confused, each one asks his father for explanations, to which he tells them that on the battlefield he met a mercenary, a warrior famous for his strength called Cabal. Rayleigh remembers when he met him in Rainfield, and his father continues telling him about his fierce combat. In other one-on-one situations, he could have won, but since that was not the case, Things ended that way the moment his people were damaged. Riley reflected that he wanted to live without worry and in a relaxed manner, but he also promised not to lose as in his previous life, and he never wished for his father to return in that state. The Count tells them that due to his condition, the time had finally come to choose the successor of the family. The time for succession had finally arrived. Riley would have to leave on a mission, like his brothers, to prove who was most worthy of being the next successor. What problems await Riley in his next mission? What will happen with Nain? Many things await us in the future.